Fastamai, everybody, and thank you for joining us. At first glance, this might look like a bit of an environmental discussion, but it's actually much broader than that. We're starting to recognise that the health of our natural environment is directly linked to the health of our economy. Biodiversity loss and ecosystem decline is a real risk, alongside those like energy security, economic stability. In simple terms, if nature stops functioning properly, the economy doesn't function properly either. So the question for us today is straightforward. How do we move from recognising the value of nature to actually supporting and investing in it in a practical way? The Isle of Man is already doing this through projects like CrossAgs and the Sustainable Finance Roadmap, and we're also joined by perspectives from Ireland, as we've heard, which gives us a useful comparison. So without further ado, let me just very quickly introduce the panel. We have Graham Makepeace-Warne, CEO of Manx Wildlife Trust. We've got Alan Costello, who you've just met, Chair of the Board of Directors of Natural Capital Ireland. We've got Nigel Cheesley, Country Head of Isle of Man for Lloyds Bank International. And a last-minute addition, we're very pleased, he's flown all the way in from Port St Mary to join us this afternoon, is Greg Easton, MD at Resilience Asset Management, and also Chair of the Isle of Man Sustainable Finance Initiative. So welcome, everybody. And I'll just start by maybe getting a quick perspective from each of you. Graham, maybe first. What does working with nature actually look like in practice at a project like CrossAgs? And what are you trying to improve?
Thanks very much, Fastamai, everyone. I think probably most people in the room will know how important this is to me and Manx Wildlife Trust. I come from a business background, and getting the value of nature into our economy and our way of working is so important. As an organisation, we've been around for more than 50 years, and philanthropy is great. If anyone in this room wants to give us a load of money to do good stuff for nature, please talk to me. But unfortunately, that doesn't allow me to plan the organisation as we want to plan it like a business. We can't think like nature, as Merlin Hanbury Tennyson said. We need to think like oak trees. The oak trees live for 1,000 years. 5-year politics and short-term leases wouldn't mean a thing to an oak tree. We need to think long-term, and to do that, we need to be able to plan our finances long-term, and we can't do that if we don't know when the next legacy is going to come or next donation is going to come. So turning what we do as an organisation, restoring nature, restoring habitats, into something that can actually bring an income in is really important. And everything that Alan was just saying resonates so much with us. So what that looks like on the ground, you mentioned CrossAgs, which is a pilot scheme that we did back in 2023, working with Lloyds and Resilience and others, is essentially a couple of fields where we've planted trees. Now, you've all come across tree planting carbon credit schemes before, and there's been a lot of bad press over the last few years. There's been a lot of what's called greenwashing. What we try to do here is high-integrity carbon credits. So we're not planting boring Sitka spruce on a massive scale, jamming in as many trees as we can into those two fields. We're planting native mixed deciduous woodland, Manx native oak, and other species, and we're planting quite sparsely, so we're leaving spaces for glades, ponds, and other features that won't give us any benefit in terms of carbon credits, but they would give us benefits in terms of biodiversity credits, and Alan touched on that point as well, and hopefully that is something that's going to come in time. But also the amenity, the value for the local community. So in some of those glades, we will talk to the local community and find out what they want, see what they need. You know, would they like a yoga shala or an education centre or a fire pit or something that the local community can get involved with and use. So the whole site then supports nature, supports people, supports the economy. It's a win-win-win situation.
That's fantastic. And Alan, bringing in kind of a perspective from Ireland, when you hear about the story about CrossAgs, does that kind of feel like the right approach? And what stands out from your experience in Ireland?
So it's a fantastic project. There's a project in the north of Mayo where a philanthropist got involved with a legacy project. He'd made money out of private equity funds in a number of sectors that actually did touch the natural sector. And he bought 700 hectares of peatland, and he put diggers on site to dam up the old drains and allow the water level to rise and restore that bit of peatland, simplistically put. And he was doing it philanthropically, and he said, sure, if there's a carbon credit or a biodiversity credit or something like that, well and good. And an agency called Wild Away came in with a German fund who are now making that 700 acres sustainable long beyond that person and that person's children's lifetimes, because it's going to be self-perpetuating. So projects can start with what seems to feel like nice to have, or we'll do a pond in the garden, or we'll plant some native Manx oak trees, or we can do it at scale. But these things multiply up, and these have scale, and when they all roll up together, you are building a biosphere. You are building an entire natural environment that people can find very, very easy to get on board with. So projects like this, fantastic. Many more of them, and when they link together, they start having a macro effect on a country, and that's what we need to do to get out of our polycrisis that we have at the moment.
Thanks, Alan. Nigel, from a banking perspective, at what point does something like this become something the financial sector can realistically support, and what kind of needs to be in place for that to happen?
Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. I think this is a relatively new element for the finance sector, but it's a really important one as well. And I know we're going to unpack some of that during the rest of our conversation. But just building on a point that Graham made, a sustainable business model that isn't commercially viable, that is not sustainable. A sustainable business model that is not commercially viable, that is philanthropy. So it's really important that when we think about, in the context of nature-based solutions and how we finance them, that there is a commercially viable business model to support that, because that's really important in the banking space, so that we've got that sort of serviceability for the financing. I think the other bit that is really important is that we need innovative solutions that help to actually reduce the cost of capital, risk sharing that brings down that cost of capital, and that improves the viability of projects like CrossAgs as well. The good thing is that the Isle of Man as an international finance centre has all of the building blocks for the right kind of infrastructure that we need to support the nature markets. We've got a thriving banking sector, a fantastic professional services sector, and a vibrant insurance sector. And this means that this particular opportunity is particularly exciting for us.
Thanks, Nigel. Greg, how does that kind of fit in, or that project fit into the Isle of Man's sustainable finance roadmap? And is CrossAgs a one-off, or is it part of something bigger?
It has to be something bigger, a lot bigger, and that's part of the reason that we launched the Sustainable Finance Roadmap over a year ago now, to say how can we take projects like CrossAgs and actually develop the finance centre we've got, help future-proof the finance centre here by making sustainable finance central to it, and looking at how to establish a nature market where institutions, family offices, private sector can participate in that. A lot of the points that Alan raised in his presentation, and you flicked on the World Economic Forum risks, the 10-year risks there, and those risks are only increasing. We are, be in no doubt, we're living in the Anthropocene and in a perma-crisis, and businesses and asset owners need to be thinking about the future and going from a kind of doing no harm to nature approach to having a nature positive approach. And we're seeing that, and that investors, they get distracted by the noise of geopolitical conflict. So March, prime example of what's happened in the Middle East. But actually that helps to demonstrate taking a sustainable approach as an investor is helping to future-proof you. And I think like the next Black Swan event that we have will be an environmentally driven one, and we've got to recognise how important nature is, even though it's very hard to put the value on it or the cost on it, but how important it is to businesses, to investors, and to jurisdictions like the Isle of Man and across Celtic nations.
Yeah, so you mentioned value there, and I want to kind of move on to that question of value. We all agree nature matters, but the challenge is how we recognise that in a way that influences decisions. So I think the question is, how do we put real value on nature in a way that's useful in practice? So maybe Alan, your experience in Ireland, how far have we got doing this meaningfully?
So 2 months ago, 3 Irish towns flooded because of another 1 in 100 year rainfall event. We're having a lot of 1 in 100 year climate events at the moment. So the World Economic Forum highlighting the risks, 5 of the top 10 risks that they see happening in the near term future are all related to climate environmental risks. Those 3 towns, maybe I shouldn't draw them into absolute specifics, but if you allow me to speak about them in generality, some of those have flood management that have put enormous concrete barriers around the rivers and streams that are going through the village and have damaged the tourism product, which is a wider benefit and a wider secondary benefit. Some of those towns had rivers that could have been managed upstream in terms of slowing the water down, diversifying and spreading out the water. That's a nature-based solution. So these things aren't environmental nice-to-haves. They're becoming part of our normal infrastructure, and we value normal infrastructure, and we put large construction firms and large engineering firms and large design firms to designing our infrastructure. We're designing with nature. It has a value. It has a benefit to us as humans beyond what has been the environmental perception of 5, 10, 25 or 35 years ago. And I think as you went through the first question with each of us, it kind of struck me that the process that we're talking about is not new. It's a new financial product. But the process of how we get there, it starts with activists. It goes into individual use cases. It gets subsidy support. And when it becomes mainstream, you take those subsidy supports away, and then you have a normal financial product or a normal engineered product. So the process that we're going through is not new. It's just that it's new in this environment, and it's something that we're all going to be getting used to. So nature has an absolute infrastructural value. It has a personal and a societal value. NHS is starting to prescribe nature for mental health, copying what the Japanese and the Norwegians have been doing for 30 years. So putting a value on it it feels like you're putting a price on it, and that feels a bit icky, really, probably to most people, and it's not about that. It's about understanding the quantifiable benefits that it gives to us and then being able to protect it.
Graham, comes to you on this. Does putting value on nature help you on the ground, or does it do something else? Does it risk oversimplifying things? How does it work for you on the ground with what you're doing? Yeah,
I think I touched on this before about how valuable giving nature a value could be for us as an organisation, the work that we do. The difficulty, as you pointed out, is how we put that value on it, and that's where Manx Wildlife Trust as a science-driven organisation is well placed to do that, because if we're going to do it in a high-integrity way, we need a lot of science to be able to prove exactly what's happening in terms of whether it's sequestering carbon or increasing biodiversity and the value that brings to ourselves through the economy, etc. So the example for me that's really prevalent on Ireland, most people will know about the Manx rainforest restoration work that we do. Now, that was funded through the Wildlife Trust in partnership with Aviva, which is an insurance company. And I don't think they'll mind me saying that in the past they've done more traditional carbon credit schemes where it's forest protection schemes and there's no additionality. And so they got stung for greenwashing, got their fingers burnt, and they approached the Wildlife Trust and said, we still want to do this, we want to do it properly. How do we do it? And as a result of those conversations, they pledged nearly £39 million to restoring temperate rainforest across the British Isles. Western seaboard of England and Wales and Scotland, eastern seaboard of Ireland, and slap bang in the middle of that is the Isle of Man. So we were able to take advantage of that. And so when the scheme started in 2023, we bought Craigie Cowan, which is 105 acres. And actually last week, or a couple of weeks ago, we finished up planting 30,000 trees there. Now, it's fair to say that when Aviva started working with us on that project, they were all about the carbon. It was all about the carbon that came out of that site, and that is all, worked out very scientifically and accurately. But as we've built that relationship with them, they've talked less and less about the carbon and more about the biodiversity that's being increased on that site. And these are long-term projects, so the contract that we have with Aviva is 100 years. Not many contracts in business, or let alone conservation, last that long. But that's the kind of thinking that we need to be able to. That between long-term thinking and science is how we'll find the true value.
Yeah. Nigel, are you sort of starting to see this show up as something that affects risks and decision-making around risk?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Nature underpins around 50% of global GDP, and as Alan mentioned, that in terms of value to the UK is about £1.8 trillion. And businesses that fail to account for nature risk may be underestimating one of the biggest threats to long-term resilience, market stability and value creation. I don't know if anyone saw the UK security assessment that was published at the end of January, but it does make quite stark reading. And essentially, what they said is they made three high confidence judgments about the impact of biodiversity loss. The first is that global ecosystem degradation and collapse threaten UK national security and prosperity. The second was that critical ecosystem services that support major global food production and impact global climate, water and weather cycles are the most important. And that degradation of these would severely impact crop yields, fisheries collapse, and risk more novel zoonotic diseases like we had with COVID. And of course, also the loss of valuable pharmaceutical resources. The third point that they made was that ecosystem degradation is occurring across all regions. Every single critical system that we have at the moment is on a pathway to collapse. So you can also see this showing up, as Greg mentioned, in the Global Economic Forum, especially in the 10-year risk horizon, with global biodiversity loss coming in second behind extreme weather events. So I think we're going to continue to see the way we react to these evolve. We've already got frameworks like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures starting to emerge, and tools like the LEAP assessment, so that's locate, evaluate, assess and prepare, to help us identify and manage nature-related risks. And I think we'll continue to see this be a major area of focus in the years to come.
Thanks, Nigel. Just quickly, panelists, I just want to kind of explore a practical question, and if this matters, who actually pays for this? Who actually pays for it? Alan, in Ireland, where does the funding come from today?
So we did that study that identified over 150 different funding sources that range from philanthropic through to corporate and governmental. The international markets will buy carbon credits, do buy carbon credits, do buy biodiversity credits, but that has to and is moving from a voluntary status, which took a knock this week because Microsoft pulled back from buying voluntary carbon credits. That's moving to a statutory phase from 2027 onwards. So companies will buy these type of credits in order to enable the work that they do, and we need to see more of that. We need to see a lot more of the insurance companies, the banks, and the funds coming in and buying these type of credits to support business risk.
Greg, again, quickly, are we seeing approaches that bring different sources of funding together on the Isle of Man?
Yeah, and that's really what the Sustainable Finance Initiative is trying to drive, create the market so that it doesn't matter whether you're a captive insurer, you're a family office, you're private individual or a listed company, that they all have different reasons for wanting to do this. It might be they have hard to abate emissions that they can't do anything about, so they need to find a high integrity offset mechanism, emphasis on the high integrity. But also, as Alan mentioned, that businesses want to do it for different reasons, and they become more attractive businesses if they do that. So, and I think those risks that Nigel was talking about, they're called dynamic risks. They might not be financially material today, but as we hit these tipping points and trigger events, they become financially material very, very quickly. And that 1 in 100-year event is now more like a 1 in 5, 1 in 10-year event. Yeah. So there is an absolute opportunity for the Isle of Man to establish and lead in nature markets, but also an opportunity for any of you visiting from different Celtic nations. You will have a lot of biodiversity in your nations that is also degraded or degrading, and it would be fantastic if from today we can find a way to collaborate, say actually there is value there, how can we protect more nature and get more funds to the likes of Manx Wildlife Trust from any of those types of participants.
Yeah. And Nigel, what needs to be done, or what needs to be true for the finance sector to play a bigger role?
Yeah, I think there's three things that we need to see, but building on what the other guys have said. The first is greater clarity on standards, because integrity and reputation are incredibly important, and we also need to ensure that this isn't just an opportunity for big business. It needs to be accessible for small and medium-sized businesses so that they can benefit from the opportunity as well. The second thing I think we need is blended finance, which means that we bring together public and private capital, and that really helps to share the risk burden that's associated with nature-based solutions, which then reduces the cost of capital. And just taking that a step further, we need more of the concept of patient capital. So this is where investors are prepared to not focus on those short-term gains, but to think about the longer-term time horizon to see the benefits of their investment. And then finally, I think this is going to take a lot of collaboration, and so partnerships are really key in this, working together from different sectors to make this as impactful as possible.
Thanks. Just really conscious of time, so just going to try and bring it to a close and wrap up. So, guys, in one sentence, if we can, what needs to happen over the next few years to make natural capital something we see in practice, not just being talked about in discussion? Graham?
From my point of view, there are no jobs on a dead planet. That's the driver. And for us to make this happen, we need a code in place, a nature code that says exactly what we can and can't do on the island. And then we need a registry to handle this. So there's regulation to make sure this is done properly and in the right way.
Fantastic. Nigel?
Yes, this market is really important, whether it's today, tomorrow, or 5 years from now. The political noise that we hear out there at the moment is completely irrelevant. We just need to listen to what nature is telling us. And when we do, market forces will drive this forward, and because ultimately we're all living beings, part of a natural system.
Thank you. Greg?
So imagine you're in 2050. What will your children and investors then think of the decisions we make today with the knowledge we have now? We've got to shift the way we do things, and it's all tied in with fiduciary duty, making it sort of part of decision making to do something, acknowledging the risks and doing something about it. And I think we've got a great opportunity to progress that.
Thank you very much. Alan?
Just to say before I get lynched, I've been writing and thinking about the environment and nature since I was 8 years old, and the ozone layer crisis was coming on Blue Peter. But if I want to leave you with a message, it's that I don't want you to think about this as a nature or an environment or a Save the Penguins conversation. This is a mainstreaming of a financial product that allows us to invest in our economy. It's that the environment and the nature is part of that, and we have to become naturalized to that idea. This isn't environment or charitable this is a mainstream financial product, and the sooner we get the insurance companies, the banks, the corporates, and the governments driving that lever, the better.
Thank you. I think kind of what's clear from the discussion is that this is no longer just a theoretical idea. You know, it's starting to take shape through real projects and practical application. If we can continue to connect ecology, practical delivery, and finance, we've got an opportunity not just to protect nature, but obviously build a more resilient economy for everybody. I'd like to thank all the guests on the panel, absolutely fantastic. I'd like to thank you guys for listening. Thank you very much. Guru Mayad.